On Mother's Day, my son gave me a card that said, "Thanks for the genetics." So I gave the land he was hoping to inherit to his stepbrother. Mother, what do you think about drafting your will today, since everyone's here and the lawyers already arrived? That was the first thing Charles said once the candles were blown out. No toast, no embrace, no warm memory shared. Just that. The room fell quiet. The decorations were still fluttering, silver and purple streamers draped across the mantel. I could smell lemon cake and champagne. A tripod had been discreetly set up in the corner, its little red light blinking. "Just for memories," they said. I looked at Charles, my firstborn, my boy who used to beg me to sing lullabies on stormy nights. He was now a man in a tailored navy suit, standing like a prosecutor, not a son. I answered gently, "I have not thought about that yet, sweetheart. I am still in good health." He sneered, picked up his wine glass, stared at me through it for a second, and then, crash. The glass shattered on the tile floor, wine splattering across the edge of the white tablecloth, like blood on linen. "Mama, still alive for what?" he snapped. "To hold on to the land till it swallows you? Or to let that adopted little bastard laugh when he gets it all?" The silence in the room grew heavy. Linda, his wife, sat stone-faced. The lawyer looked down at his papers. The live stream kept recording. I saw the reflection of my own face in the dark eye of the camera. I did not flinch. I did not speak. But I looked. I looked into that camera like it was my own judgment day, and I had come prepared. And that is when I will tell you, this moment was not the beginning. It was simply the explosion, the match to a fuse that had been burning for years, decades. Since the moment I told the first lie to protect the son, I could not stop loving. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Because now, I will take you back. Not to the birthday, not to the glass on the floor, but to a Tuesday morning 41 years ago, when Charles came into my kitchen wearing a silk tie and a desperate smile. He had come home from college with news. He had fallen in love. "Her name is Linda," he said, setting a picture on the counter. "She is from a different world, Mom. You'll like her." The photo showed a young woman with hair like honey and a smile that said she had never been told no. I knew women like that. I had never been one of them. "She's ambitious," he continued. "Her family owns property near the coast. They expect a future." I raised an eyebrow. "A future?" "They want to know I will have land, stability. That I am serious." I turned off the stove and looked him in the eyes. "Charles, this land is not part of a marriage proposal. It is our home." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "They just want a verbal agreement, nothing legal. Just that you'll pass the land to me when the time comes." I said no. 2 weeks later, he brought Linda to meet me. She was dressed like she had just stepped out of a catalog, pearl earrings, manicured hands, not a single hair out of place. She called me ma'am and handed me a bottle of wine. "We believe in building futures," she said, "and land is a foundation." I looked down at the wine in my hands. It felt heavy. It felt like bait. They married that fall. I gave them my blessing, not my deed. I thought that was the end of it. It was not. Linda never stopped circling the land. At every holiday, there was a suggestion, a comment. "We could build a guest house here," or "This property would double in value if we had it appraised properly." I always answered the same: "It is not for sale." Charles stopped visiting alone. He came only with Linda, and eventually, only to ask. Then came the day I failed myself, the first lie. 15 years ago, Charles came to me in a panic. He had lost his job. He was drowning in debt. Linda was threatening to leave. The kids were in private school. "Just help us until the new year," he pleaded. "Just this once." I had just sold a piece of the North Acre, 10 acres, nothing more, for a hospital project. I had cash. I gave it to him. But when Matthew asked, Matthew, my adopted son, the quiet one who never asked for anything, I lied. I told him the money was for medical expenses. That lie carved a crack in the family that never healed. Charles and Linda saw the money not as help, but as proof that I could be worn down, that eventually the land would be theirs. But what they did not know, what only the county clerk and Matthew knew, was that I had changed the deed 5 years prior. Half of it was now Matthew. I had done it quietly, without ceremony, because he had earned it. He had mowed the lawn every week, fixed the roof, sat with me during long winters, never once asked for a dime, just gave. And Charles? Charles gave me ultimatums, until my 80th birthday. That is when he set the trap, invited everyone, streamed it live, said it was a celebration, but hired a lawyer, set out the papers, expected me to sign. And when I refused, when I simply said I was not ready, he broke the glass and tried to break me. But I had already made peace. I stood up, I looked into the lens, and I said just one thing: you forget I am still alive. Then I walked out of my own birthday party, past my own son, past the lawyer, past Linda and her pearls and her plans. I walked out, and I did not look back. The year was 1976. The air smelled of rust and lilacs that spring, and I was 37, newly divorced, pregnant, and scared out of my skin. My husband had left the day after Valentine, said he was tired of being a family man, walked out with his shirts and his books and not much else, except the name he left behind on Charles's birth certificate. Charles was 10, sensitive boy, too smart for his own good. He watched me closely that year, every movement, every silence, like he was trying to solve me before I changed into someone he would not recognize. He was terrified I would fall in love again. One night, as I sat on the edge of his bed rubbing his back, he whispered, "You won't get a new husband, right? You won't let someone replace Dad?" I did not answer right away. My hand froze mid-circle on his little spine. I wanted to tell him that no man alive could replace what I had lost or what I had survived, but children do not understand grief the way grown women do. So I said, "No, sweetheart, I won't." And that was true. But then he asked, "And the baby? Will he be my real brother?" That is when I lied. I said, "He is not from me and Dad. He is a little baby who lost his mama." And I said, "I would be his mama now, so you'll be his big brother." Charles's eyes softened. "So you chose him?" I nodded. "I chose him because he needed love, just like I choose to love you every day." He smiled. And just like that, the seed was planted. A seed of love, yes, but wrapped in a lie meant to shield a boy from pain. That lie grew quietly, like ivy. I named the baby Daniel. Dan, for short. He was born in July, with quiet brown eyes and a calmness I did not know babies could have. He rarely cried. Even as a toddler, he would sit beside me while I shelled peas or folded laundry, content just to be near. When Charles ran wild in the fields, Dan followed, but always at a distance, never quite leading, never quite catching up. He was the shadow, the second thought, not because I loved him less, but because I loved them both too much in different ways. Charles was the hurricane, Dan was the still pond, and I was a mother trying to be the sky for both. I raised them together in that old house, with its squeaky screen door and front porch swing that tilted to the right. I made their lunches, I patched their jeans, I attended every parent-teacher conference. I stayed up sewing costumes for the school play. But I never corrected the lie. I let Charles grow up thinking Dan was adopted, and I let Dan grow up believing he was. He never asked for the truth, but I saw it in his eyes, especially when he started school, and teachers would pause when they saw his last name on the roll. "You're Natalie's boy?" they would ask, surprised. He would nod, then glance at me across the hallway, as if to make sure he still was. I never stopped loving him, but I realize now, I failed him. By trying to protect Charles, I built a quiet prison for Dan, because no matter how kind he was, how helpful, how gentle, he always walked one step behind his older brother, and Charles made sure it stayed that way. At birthdays, Charles always got the first slice. At Christmas, he opened the big box. Dan never complained. He watched and waited, and said thank you. That boy knew how to vanish in plain sight. By the time they were teens, the lines were drawn. Charles was the real son. Dan was the guest who never left. But what no one knew, not even Dan, was that he was mine, fully mine. The child I had carried, the child I had nursed, the child I had named while staring at the ceiling of a dim hospital room, afraid to bring him into a world that had already failed one family. His father had been a mistake, a brief chapter I never reread. He had died in an accident 3 months after I told him I was pregnant. His name was not on any birth certificate. No family ever came forward to claim Dan, only I did. And yet, for decades, I let my firstborn believe the lie was mercy. Maybe that is what mothers do. Maybe that is where we go wrong. We hide truths thinking they are kindnesses. We swallow pain so our children will not choke. We stitch silence into the hems of our lives because we think that is what strength looks like. But silence has a cost. For Charles, it meant growing up with entitlement, thinking the land, the house, the legacy, all of it, was his by birthright. For Dan, it meant growing up with shame, with questions he dared not voice, with a place in the family that felt borrowed. And for me, it meant carrying the weight of a lie so heavy, it bent my spine long before age ever did. There were moments when I almost told them. When Dan brought me tea after my surgery and said, "I wish I had your patience." When Charles rolled his eyes and said, "Dan should be grateful." We took him in. When I saw the way Dan smiled at baby pictures of Charles, but had none of his own framed, but I stayed silent. I thought I was protecting peace. Instead, I was feeding a quiet war that would one day break our home apart. So if you are listening now, if you have ever kept a truth locked behind your ribs because you thought it would save someone, you are not alone. But you must know, even mercy can become poison when it is soaked in silence. The truth always waits. And in my family, it waited for over 40 years, until it finally stood up and said, "Enough." When my boys grew up, they went in two very different directions. Charles married a city girl, moved to Baton Rouge, and climbed the ladder fast. By 35, he was already a financial director for a construction firm, living in a 2-story brick house with marble countertop and a pool they barely used. They had 2 children, both in private school, both raised to say grandmother instead of grandma, and neither of them knew how to look people in the eye for more than a second. Dan, meanwhile, stayed close. He never asked to, never demanded anything. He just stayed, bought a modest house 10 minutes from mine, started his own HVAC business, fixed broken dryers and leaky pipes during the day, read old paperbacks in the evening. Every Sunday, he came by with a bag of groceries I never asked for, just in case, he'd say, setting them down on the counter. He would fix a hinge, reattach a screen, change the oil on my old truck without a word, and then he'd sit on the porch swing with me and let the crickets fill the quiet. But Charles came only for holidays, and even then, not all of them. When he did visit, it was with an air of inspection, like he was here to check boxes, not share meals, and with him came Abigail. Ah, Abigail. She was the type of woman who smiled with her teeth but not her eyes, the kind who spoke softly in front of others, but whose words always carried judgment. "Mom," she said once, pulling her coat tighter as she stood in my kitchen, "you really should not wear those aprons. They make you look like a cleaning lady." I smiled and said, "Well, I do clean. And I am a lady." She did not laugh. Another time, she wrinkled her nose and said, "You still ride that bike to the market? It still works." She exchanged a look with Charles, then said, "It is not about working, it is about appearance. The neighbors, our friends, they see you like that. It reflects on us, reflects on them, like I was a smudge on their glass lot." I remember one afternoon, sitting at their dining table, while Abigail served espresso in tiny cups and told me I should try laser facial. "Your skin," she said, "would brighten right up with just a few treatments." I looked her straight in the eye and said, "My skin has lived 80 years, Abigail. It does not need brightening, it needs respect." She never offered again, but her opinions never stopped coming. "Mama, you should do something about your hair. Mama, you need to modernize. Maybe get an iPhone? Mama, you cannot wear those shoes when you come to church with us." And Charles just let her talk. Sometimes he added to it. One Sunday morning, I was riding my bicycle to the farmer's market when his car slowed beside me. He rolled down the window. "For God's sake, Mom," he said, "take the bus or let us buy you a car. You embarrass us like." I kept pedaling. That night, I sat on my porch and wondered when my son had become a stranger. When did the boy who used to run barefoot in the fields decide his mother was a burden? But what cut deepest was this. Abigail was the one who first brought up the will. It was last Christmas, after dinner. The grandkids were in the other room, playing on their phones. Dan had helped clear the table, kissed me goodnight, and left. And as I sat on the couch rubbing my knee, Abigail sat down beside me with a binder. "We've been meaning to talk to you," she said, her voice smooth. "It is time to think about your legacy." I laughed. "I still plan on living, thank you." She smiled like I had misunderstood. "Of course, but these things are easier when done early, while you still have clarity. We've even spoken to someone who can help draw up the document." I asked, "Someone?" Charles came in with 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. "A lawyer," he said. "Just a formality, Mom. We can take care of everything." I set my tea down. "Everything?" "Well, Abigail said. The house, the land, the savings. It is just easier to allocate things now. Charles and I can manage it. Dan does not really need to be involved in the legal side. It would only confuse him. Confuse him. That was when I knew. To them, Dan was not family. He was background noise, the quiet boy with grease on his hands, the one who brought over soup but would never be invited to dinner. And me? I was a relic, a creature from a simpler time who needed to be cleaned up and quietly filed away. They did not say it outright. They never do. But every word, every glance, every sigh carried that weight, that I was no longer someone to learn from, just someone to manage. But I remembered something that night, something I had buried under casseroles and Christmas cards and trying to keep the peace. I remembered that the land had my name on it, and I remembered what that name meant. Natalie June Barrow, born on this land, raised 3 children on this land, buried my parents on this land, tended every inch of soil with hands that still remembered how. I may not speak with polish, I may not wear pearls, I may not have manicured nails or use FaceTime or own a purse that costs more than my mortgage, but I have something they forgot to account for: memory. And memory holds power. It remembers who showed up, who fixed the broken pipe in the winter, who brought groceries when I was too sick to stand, who never once asked, "What do I get?" So I let Abigail talk. I let her print her papers. I let her make appointments. But I also made one of my own. Not with their lawyer, with a notary downtown. And I brought the real air with me. Mother's Day came with sunshine, birdsong, and silence. There were no phone calls, no surprise visits, just a knock on the door around 10 in the morning, my mailman, smiling, holding a single envelope. "From Baton Rouge," he said, tapping it gently like it was something delicate. "Looks like a card." I thanked him and waited until he left before I opened it. The envelope was pale blue. No handwriting on the outside, just my name typed in a stiff little font. Inside, a Hallmark card with gold trim and a cartoon daisy holding a coffee cup. I opened it slowly. "Thanks for the genetics. That's about all I got from you." No signature, just that sentence, written in Charles's unmistakable print. No, "Happy Mother's Day." No love, Charles. Just that. I stared at the card for a long time. My tea had gone cold before I finally closed it and set it aside. It is strange, the way words can bleed more than blades. I have buried people, survived a marriage that bruised more than it built, lived through nights when I thought the only light I would ever see again came from the porch lamp flickering behind moths. But that sentence cut deeper than anything I have ever known. "Thanks for the genetics," as if that was all I had ever been. A womb, a vessel, a signature on a birth certificate, and nothing more. No mention of the meals I cooked, the clothes I washed, the nights I spent bent over his fevered body, whispering stories about stars and safe places. No memory of the time I went without heat just to afford his school trip. No honor in the fact that I still, after everything, remembered his favorite soup. Just genetics. I placed the card on the windowsill and looked out across the yard. Not long after, I heard footsteps on the porch, a soft knock, then Dan's voice. "Mom, you up?" I wiped my eyes with the edge of my sleeve and opened the door. He stood there with a clay pot in his hands. Inside it, a single orchid, purple and white, just beginning to bloom. "She's not much," he said, "but she's stubborn, like someone else I know." I smiled, and my voice nearly cracked. "She's perfect." He stepped inside and looked around, then asked, "Pipe still leaking under the sink?" "It started again last night." He went to work without another word, wrenched it loose, resealed the joint, tightened every bolt. I made him coffee while he worked. He did not ask for anything in return. He never did. After he left, I sat with the orchid on the table and the card on the windowsill, one giving life, the other taking it. That is when I stood up. I walked to my bedroom and opened the old wardrobe. Behind the coats, behind the worn blankets, was the safe. I had not touched it in months. The code still came easy, my parents' wedding date. Inside were the papers, receipts, birth certificate, bonds, one photograph of my boys when they were small, both grinning in mud-soaked boots, and the will. I pulled it out and set it on the desk. 5 years ago, I had written it with a lawyer who looked me in the eye and said, "Are you sure you want this clause?" I had nodded. He said, "It is unusual, but legal." I said, "Good. Make it clear." And there it was, in black and white, right beneath the list of named beneficiaries. Any child of mine who uses coercion, intimidation, violence, or verbal abuse toward me concerning matters of inheritance shall forfeit all rights to any part of the estate, immediately and irrevocably. It was not bitterness that led me to write those words. It was protection. For myself, for my peace, for the part of me that knew what it felt like to be treated like a vault instead of a mother. Charles had forgotten that clause. He had forgotten many things. He forgot the Christmas I walked through a snowstorm to buy him the last toy robot on the shelf. He forgot the letter I wrote to get him into college when we could not afford the application fee. He forgot the nights I sewed his costume for the school play because he was too embarrassed to wear one made from paper. But I had not forgotten, and now, on this quiet Mother's Day, with his cold little card sitting in the windowsill and Dan's orchid blooming in the sun, I remembered exactly what love was supposed to feel like and what it was not. Love does not belittle. Love does not measure your worth by your estate. Love does not arrive in a pre-typed envelope with sarcasm as its stamp. I read the clause again, slowly, carefully. Then I folded the will back into its folder and returned it to the safe. I locked it with a calm hand. I sat back in my chair and watched the light fall across the orchid, and I whispered, not to anyone, but just to myself, just loud enough for memory to hear, "Thank you, Dan." Not for the pipe, not for the flower, but for still seeing me, when the rest of them only saw what they could take. It was supposed to be a celebration, my 80th birthday, or at least, that is what they called it. "A milestone, Mama," Charles had said over the phone, voice warm with fake cheer. "You only turn 80 once, let us make it special." Abigail followed up 2 days later with an invitation printed in gold letters and sealed in wax, like we were royalty. "An intimate gathering of family and a few close friends," it said. "Come dressed for joy." I wore my favorite blue dress, the one Dan once complimented when I wore it to church. Simple, soft, no frills. My hair was pinned back. My pearls were fake, but clean. I arrived 5 minutes early, carrying a small bottle of plum wine as a gift for the host, even though the host was supposedly me. Their house smelled like rosemary and polish. Classical music drifted in from the living room. Everything was perfect, too perfect. Abigail greeted me at the door with a hug so stiff, I could feel the fabric of her blouse wrinkle between us. "You look radiant," she said through her teeth. "Come in, everyone's waiting." Dan had not come yet, said he had a client emergency and would swing by after. The guests were mostly their friends, people I barely knew but had apparently been told to call me Mama Natalie. They complimented my dress, my hair, my graceful aging. Someone handed me champagne, someone else handed me a microphone. Abigail appeared with a cake that said, "Family Legacy" in swirly white frosting, and Charles stepped forward with a man I did not recognize. "This," he said, placing a firm hand on the stranger's back, "is Paul. He's a longtime friend of mine, and a lawyer." I turned. The man smiled, thin lips, paper-pale skin. He extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Barrow. Charles has told me so much about you." I took his hand out of habit. It was cold and dry. Charles gestured toward the camera set up in the corner of the room. "We're recording, by the way. Just a little family footage. Keepsakes for the kids." I looked at the red blinking light. That camera had been running since I walked through the door. No one had asked if I wanted to be filmed. No one asked anything at all. We moved into the dining room. Wine was poured. The air turned thick. The laughter felt staged. Abigail kept placing her hand gently on my back, guiding me, as if I were a child lost in a store. "Sit here," she said, pointing to the seat at the head of the table. "Best seat in the house." Once we were all seated, Charles stood, raised his glass, and said, "To our mother, who gave us life, gave us strength, and will soon give us clarity." A few confused chuckles from the guests, the kind of laugh you give when you do not understand, but want to belong. I stayed quiet. Then came the document. Paul, the lawyer, this so-called longtime friend, placed a folder on the table in front of me. "Mrs. Barrow," he said smoothly, "we thought this would be a good time to take care of some practical matters. Just a simple will. Nothing binding today unless you're comfortable." Abigail slid a pen across the table. Charles said, "It is just smart, Mama. While everyone's here, it saves us confusion later." I looked down at the folder. My name was on the first page, typed neatly. I looked up at the camera again, still blinking, still recording. I glanced at Abigail. Her smile tightened. Then, I looked at Charles. "Is this why you gathered all these people?" I asked. He smiled. You always said family was everything. I did not mean it as a threat. His face changed, just for a second, just long enough for the warmth to flicker out. Mama, he said flatly, do you want to leave us with a mess? I placed the pen down. I have not decided anything yet, and I will not be rushed. Abigail leaned in. No one's rushing you. We just thought it'd be nice. A legacy. A moment to remember. I stood up slowly. Then remember this. I am still alive, and I will not be bullied into a signature. The room went silent. Then Charles picked up his wine glass and slammed it onto the table. It shattered. Jesus Christ, Mom. You live forever, but all you do is prolong the drama. Gasps around the room. A few people stood. Someone grabbed a napkin. I did not move. I stared at my son. This man with the graying temples, the expensive suit, the practiced voice, and the eyes of a boy who had forgotten how to feel shame. He met my gaze, jaw tight. Mama, every year you cling to that land, to that house, to that old name. It just drags everything out. You think it is noble, but it is pathetic. Abigail touched his arm. Charles, maybe not now. He shook her off. I turned to the camera. It blinked. It caught everything, every word. I did not say a thing, not a single word. I just looked into it, held my face still. Let my silence speak for itself, because there is power in restraint. There is power in letting the world see you, not raging, not begging, but remembering. Let them rewind the footage one day. Let them play it back and see the moment it all shifted. When the matriarch did not scream, she simply stood and stared, and knew. The morning after the party, I went straight to Mr. Jenkins's office with the USB drive. He watched the footage, stopped when the glass shattered, and his jaw tightened. I want to file a record, I said. Elder abuse, intimidation, harassment with intent to manipulate estate decisions. He nodded slowly. We can build a case. I don't need a lawsuit, I said. I need something permanent, something public. Then I took a trembling breath. And I want to tell them everything. About Dan, too. So we drafted the letter. 3 days later, it was posted on the courthouse bulletin board, the church newsletter, and, thanks to my neighbor's granddaughter, on Facebook, where it spread like wildfire. People didn't scroll past it. They stopped. They read. They shared. The letter began. To those who have known me as Natalie June Barrow, mother of 2, quiet widow, keeper of old land and older secrets, I have something to say. I told the truth, that Dan was not adopted, that he was mine, that I had carried him through one of the loneliest seasons of my life, raised him beside Charles, but told one lie to protect the other, and that lie had grown into a silence that had smothered us all. I wrote, Dan is not less than, he is not second, he is not anyone's shadow, he is the child I bore in grief and raised in love. If I called him son fewer times than I should have, it was not for lack of love, it was for fear. A mother's fear of breaking the fragile peace between 2 boys she loved more than herself. Then I printed, in bold, the clause from my will. Any child who uses coercion, intimidation, violence, or verbal abuse toward me concerning matters of inheritance shall forfeit all rights to my estate, immediately and irrevocably. And finally, I ended with, I may not speak like you, I may not dress like you, but I have memory, and memory is louder than money. The internet did what it does best. Within 24 hours, my name was trending in a Facebook group for Southern women over 50. Local blogs picked it up. People called me brave, wise, said they cried reading it. But not everyone was moved by sympathy. For Charles, the letter landed like a blade. He had believed for decades that Dan was the outsider, the adopted one, the one who should be grateful. Seeing in black and white that Dan was my real son and legal heir cracked something deep inside him. He did not issue a statement. He did not come to my house. Charles had never raised a hand to anyone before, but I had seen the way his jaw tightened when he didn't get his way. The rage was always there, waiting. He went for Dan. That night Dan came to my door, pale-faced, holding his phone like a lifeline. Mom, he said quietly. Charles came to find me. He had waited for Dan outside his workshop. As Dan stepped out, Charles stepped forward like a shadow. His voice was cold, hissing with rage. You think you can steal everything? You know that land ain't yours. Give it up, or I'll make sure that old woman doesn't live long enough to sign another paper. Dan said nothing in the moment, but he had tapped record as soon as Charles approached. This time, he was not going to stay silent. The next morning, our lawyer submitted the audio file, to the sheriff's office. The same courthouse where Charles had planned to sue me now heard his own voice played back over the speakers. Sharp, unmistakable. "I'll make sure that old woman doesn't live long enough." 1 week later, Charles was arrested and charged with attempted murder. They cuffed him on the courthouse steps, the same ground where he thought he would take everything. And for the first time in 40 years, the silence that had hung over our family broke, not with a scream, but with justice. I had sworn I would never step into a courtroom again. Not after my divorce. Not after watching my life get divided on a judge's desk like a pie cooling on a windowsill. But at 80 years old, there I was, walking through the courthouse doors under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. Reporters waited outside. My name was on the docket again. Except this time, the case wasn't mine. It was his. Charles Barrow, arrested the previous week for attempted murder, sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. The man who once wore tailored navy suits now looked small, his hands chained, his jaw clenched. Dan sat beside me in the gallery, calloused hands folded, eyes steady. The court clerk read the charges. Attempted murder, criminal intimidation, harassment with intent to manipulate estate decisions. The audio played through the speakers. Charles's voice hissed out into the courtroom. "You think you can steal everything? You know that land ain't yours. Give it up, or I'll make sure that old woman doesn't live long enough to sign another paper." No one spoke. Even the judge's pen froze mid-note. For a moment, Charles looked at me, his face, so familiar, so changed, twisted not in shame but in disbelief, like the world had betrayed him, not the other way around. I rose slowly, hands shaking. "Your Honor," I said, my voice low but clear, "I am not here for vengeance. I am here because I spent a lifetime raising a son who thought love meant ownership. I will not be silent anymore." The prosecutor laid out the rest. Years of threats, financial manipulation, the live stream footage, the will clause, the Facebook letter, the recorded threat to Dan. Charles's lawyer tried to paint him as a desperate man pushed to the edge. But desperation is not a defense. The judge's ruling was swift. Charles would be remanded to custody pending trial on the felony charges. The civil case he had filed against me was dismissed entirely. Then came the part no one expected. The court recognized my will as valid and enforceable. Dan was declared the sole heir and caretaker of the property. Charles forfeited all claims, immediately and irrevocably. Gasps filled the room. Abigail, sitting 2 rows behind, put her face in her hands. Charles stood, chains clinking. "This is a joke," he barked. "She's senile, manipulated. This isn't justice." The judge looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Mr. Barrow, justice does not always look like what we expect. Sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it is overdue, but today it is served." As the bailiff led him away, Charles turned one last time. For a heartbeat, I saw the boy he had been, the boy who once asked me if spiders cried when their webs were torn down. Then he was gone, swallowed by the courthouse doors. Reporters met me on the steps outside. Cameras flashed. A young woman with a notepad asked, "Mrs. Barrow, did you expect to win?" I said, "No." Then I smiled. But I expected to be heard. And I was. That evening, headlines bloomed across the state. 80-year-old mother outsmarts son in inheritance battle, with a clever will and a recording. Louisiana grandma wins case after son threatens attempted murder. She wrote her will in silence and spoke loud enough for the world to listen. Dan brought dinner that night, fried chicken and green beans with bacon. He said nothing for the first 20 minutes, just sat across from me, watching the steam rise from my plate. Then he finally asked, "Was it worth it?" I set down my fork. "Yes," I said, "because now no one else tells my story. I do." We ate the rest of the meal in peace. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch. The stars were out. The fields were quiet. The land was still mine. Legally, yes, but also emotionally, spiritually. It had weathered decades of struggle, birth, death, betrayal, rebuilding. And now, for the first time, it was safe. I closed my eyes and breathed in deep, because after a lifetime of bending, I had finally stood. And this time, I did not stand alone. The house looked tired when we pulled into the driveway. Paint peeling on the back fence. One shutter is missing. The flower beds are full of weeds, but it was still standing, still mine. Dan helped me out of the truck. He had taken the week off to move me back in, said Baton Rouge could keep its chaos. This little corner of Louisiana was where he belonged, and more importantly, where I belonged. He carried my bags in like he always had, quietly, no fuss, and opened every window to let in the smell of earth and honeysuckle. I sat down on the front porch swing and watched as he walked the perimeter, nodding at what needed fixing. It was a familiar rhythm. He had been doing it since he was 12. Only this time, he had plans. He returned, holding a sketch. "We clear this part," he said, pointing to the west side of the yard. "Put in benches here, and a little fountain in the middle." "For what?" I asked. "For the garden," he said. "The community garden. For kids who do not have a place to go after school. Maybe the local orphanage can bring them on weekends." I blinked. "You're turning my yard into a garden for strangers?" He smiled. "No, Mama. I'm turning it into a place for kids who were me." That stopped me. I looked at him, really looked at him, not as the quiet boy trailing his brother, not as the man who fixed what others broke, but as someone who had taken pain and planted something beautiful in it. "You'll need a name for it," I said, voice soft. He pulled a small wooden sign from behind his back, hand-carved, just like the ones his grandpa used to make. It said, "Mother's Garden, for the woman who was rejected but never retreated." I covered my mouth with my hand. We put the sign up the following Sunday. The church came. The neighbors came. Even the mayor came and offered to fund a small greenhouse. Donations poured in, soil, seeds, even old books for a tiny outdoor reading nook. Dan oversaw it all, sleeves rolled up, always with dirt under his nails and kindness in his eyes. And as the garden grew, so did the stories. Stories of what had happened, of what Charles and Abigail had tried to do, of the hearing, the video, the letter. They lost clients, lost friends, lost standing. The whispers became cold shoulders. The invitations dried up. They moved within 2 months, out of Baton Rouge entirely. No one saw them off. No one asked where they went. Justice does not always need applause. Sometimes it just needs silence where there once was power. As for me, I stayed. I stayed and watched children plant their first strawberries. I stayed and watched teenagers rake leaves they had not scattered. I stayed and watched a little girl cry when her sunflower bent over, and Dan knelt beside her, gently tying it back up with string. And I stayed because this land, my land, had finally bloomed with the kind of love I had always hoped to leave behind. One afternoon, long after the last child had gone home, I sat on the porch with Dan. The sun was low, gold pouring through the oak trees like honey. The scent of lavender and soil was thick in the air. He handed me a glass of sweet tea. We rocked in silence for a while. Then I said it. "Dan." He turned toward me. "I know I've never called you my blood, never told you what you really were to me." He smiled gently. "You don't need to." "No," I said. "But I want to." I took his hand, calloused and warm. "You are my son, not because the law said so, not because I raised you, but because even without hearing it, you never stopped loving me, like I'd already said it 100 times. His throat tightened. He looked away, then back. "Mama," he said, "I never needed to be told I belonged. I just needed a place to keep showing up." We sat there, 2 souls who had finally stopped circling the truth and now rested inside it. He leaned over and hugged me. For the first time, I let myself lean back. The sun dipped low behind the magnolia tree. The garden glowed in the light. Lilac, marigold, rosemary. The wind from the Louisiana marsh swept through the yard, soft and steady, like a whisper from another life, a whisper that might have said, "I'm sorry, I see you now." And above all, from the past that once wounded us both. You were enough. You've always been enough. Some stories end with slamming doors, others with signatures, verdicts, or silence. But this story ends in a garden, with a woman who was never loud, but never forgotten, with a son who needed no blood to belong, and with a truth that bloomed even after a lifetime of being buried. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own quiet strength, or of someone you love who deserves to be seen, please take a moment to subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Here, we give voice to the unheard. We honor the women who were once overlooked, underestimated, and quietly powerful. Your support helps us keep their stories alive, echoing across generations, across screens, and into the hearts of those who need them most. Because revenge has no expiration. Because memory never forgets its way home. Subscribe now, and let the world hear what silence has carried for far too long. This is Grandma True Stories. Thank you for listening.